I bought my dream house right outside her HOA border. Karen showed up before I even unpacked the moving truck. She had already taped an HOA violation notice to my new mailbox. Then she smiled and warned me I would regret ever moving here. My name is Marcus Reyes, and this was supposed to be a fresh start. The house sat on 2 acres just past the painted HOA boundary line. Neighbors whispered that Deborah Whitfield ran the association like her personal kingdom. I laughed it off, assuming her rules simply didn't apply to me. Deborah knocked the next morning, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp with suspicion. She insisted my property, technically, fell under association jurisdiction. No exceptions allowed. I showed her the county plat map proving my lot sat outside HOA lines. She sniffed, said maps could be wrong, and walked off without apologizing. Within days, a fake violation letter appeared, citing my unpainted fence as a crime. I called the HOA office, and the secretary admitted my address wasn't on file. Deborah brushed that aside, claiming special annexation rules covered my street. She started parking her SUV across my driveway during her morning walks. My neighbor Talia warned me Deborah once towed a stranger's car out of spite. I documented every letter, every threat, storing copies in a growing folder. Deborah began showing up uninvited, inspecting my yard like an inspector general. She told other neighbors I was difficult and clearly hiding something shady. People I'd never met started giving me cold, wary looks at the mailbox. I tried reasoning with her calmly, but she cut me off mid-sentence. "Rules are rules," she snapped, "and I decide what the rules mean here." For 2 weeks, things went quiet, and I almost believed she'd given up. I planted a small garden, finally feeling like the house was truly mine. Talia invited me to a neighborhood barbecue, and people seemed friendlier than before. I let my guard down, unaware Deborah was quietly building a bigger case. A county inspector arrived one morning, citing an anonymous complaint about my garden shed. The complaint listed violations that only someone inside my yard could have seen. My security camera showed Deborah's silhouette near the shed at 2 a.m. I confronted her with the footage. She claimed she was just checking boundaries. She then filed a noise complaint, though I'd been out of town that night. The sheriff's deputy who responded turned out to be Deborah's own son, Cole. Cole looked embarrassed, quietly telling me the complaint had no real basis. Deborah later screamed at him for not writing me a citation anyway. She began forwarding my personal information to random HOA group chats. Strangers started messaging me, repeating rumors Deborah had clearly invented herself. I found a printed annexation document stapled to my gate, dated decades ago. The signature on it looked suspiciously like Deborah's own handwriting, slightly disguised. I photographed the document before Deborah could snatch it back off my fence. Deborah's tactics turned darker once she realized her paperwork wasn't working. She hired a private contractor to survey my land for the association's records. The contractor later admitted, off the record, Deborah had ordered him to falsify results. She then threatened to have my water line accidentally disconnected during repairs. I installed extra cameras, sensing this had stopped being about property lines. One night, someone tried prying open my garden gate around midnight. My camera caught Deborah's gloved hands testing the lock before fleeing. The next morning, she accused me of trespassing onto HOA common ground. I reminded her, again, that my land wasn't HOA property at all. She laughed coldly and said, "Ownership is just paperwork I can rewrite." Deborah gathered 3 board members and marched onto my porch uninvited. "We'll seize you by force if we have to," she screamed, red-faced. Her own board members exchanged nervous glances, clearly unsure she meant it. I filed a formal complaint with the county, attaching every photo and document. Deborah, sensing pressure, escalated instead of backing down like a cornered animal. She spread a rumor that I'd threatened her, twisting our encounter completely backwards. 2 patrol cars arrived, responding to her exaggerated harassment report against me. I calmly showed the officers my full camera archive, time-stamped and unedited. One officer muttered that this wasn't the first complaint filed against Deborah. Talia arrived, telling deputies Deborah had tried the same stunt on her years ago. The lead officer asked me to preserve everything for what he called a real case. That night, Deborah gathered a small crowd, insisting we reclaim the property together. She marched onto my land with 2 board members and a rented lockbox cutter. I stood on my porch, phone recording, refusing to let her pass the gate. "You have no legal authority here," I said, "and everyone here knows it." Deborah lunged for my gate latch, screaming that I was stealing HOA land. One board member grabbed her arm, whispering, "Deborah, this isn't worth jail." She shoved him off, shouting that HOA authority extends wherever I say it does. Red and blue lights suddenly swept across the yard as patrol cars arrived. Deborah froze mid-shout, lockbox cutter still raised in her trembling hand. An officer stepped forward, reading Deborah her rights for attempted trespass and coercion. A county records clerk, alerted earlier, confirmed the annexation document was fabricated entirely. Cole, her own son, quietly handed the deputy a folder of his mother's forged forms. He admitted he'd suspected her for months but feared confronting her alone. Neighbors who once avoided me now watched, stunned. As Deborah was handcuffed, the county announced an investigation into missing HOA funds tied to her name. Weeks later, Deborah pleaded guilty to fraud and was barred from any HOA board. Talia told me half the block had been quietly documenting her abuses for years. I finally planted a real garden, safe on land that had always been mine. The END.